Welcome to the Academy of Management Subject Matter Expert Scholar Panel. I want to thank you to the scholar panelists for their time sharing their expert research-based insights on these critically important topics today. And thank you to everyone who's viewing. The Academy of Management, or AOM, is the preeminent professional association for management and organization scholars. Worldwide members are professors and PhD students in business schools at universities, academics in related social science and other fields, and practitioners who value knowledge creation and application. Founded in 1936, AOM features a global community today that is nearly 20,000 strong and spans over 120 countries. Today's panel is titled AOM Scholars On, Leading the Sustainable Way Forward. The panel will feature research-based insights that answer the question, how can firms lead sustainably and be part of the solution to climate change? This panel will examine the real-world impact of sustainability and business-focused scholarly research and provide practical advice and examples in how organizations, employees, managers, leaders, nonprofit groups, and society at large can foster effective and attainable sustainability solutions that help the collective workplace grow in a sustainable fashion. For attending scholars and media, please submit your questions via the Zoom chat function to be considered by our panelists via the Q&A portion at the end of this panel. For media that are viewing live or recorded, thank you for your time and your coverage consideration. You can access all AOM research or interview the panelists by contacting press@aom.org. Thank you for your time. And without further ado, I'll kick this over to today's moderator, Tima Bansal, a Western University professor at the Ivey Business School in London, Ontario. Tima leads Innovation North, which is reimagining business innovation to create better businesses and a more prosperous society. Tima also founded the Network for Business Sustainability and Ivey Center for Building Sustainable Values. Tima's research targets the interplay between business strategy and sustainability. She's received significant accolades for her scholarship, including holding a Tier 1 Canada Research Chair in Business Sustainability and being the first Canadian named a faculty pioneer for academic leadership by the Aspen Institute. Tima, over to you.
Thank you, Andrew. This is absolutely delightful for me to be able to host this panel, moderate this panel. I would go so far as to say these are four scholars whose work I've known for a very long time and very excited to engage in this conversation. I hope you find it as interesting as I'm sure I will. I thought we'd start with me just introducing all four panelists in order of alphabetic order, and then we would move into a little bit of dialogue that I can facilitate with each of the panelists. So the first one I want to introduce is Christian Busch. He teaches at the Center for Global Affairs at New York University, where he's currently the director of the Global Economy Program. He has been given labels such as Thinkers 50, 30 management thinkers most likely to shape the future. He's a TEDster. He's a member of the World Economic Forum's Expert Forum and a fellow of the Royal Society of Arts. Christian's area of research is innovation, purpose-driven leadership, and serendipity. That's a very cool label to be known for. His latest book is The Serendipity Mindset, The Art and Science of Creating Good Luck. So maybe you could wave, Christian. Jörg Hofstetter is our second person, is an associate professor in supply chain management at the Kedge Business School in Paris, France. He heads Kedge's Supply Chains Lab. He's also currently the president of the International Forum on Sustainable Value Chains. It's an important initiative that brings together researchers and managers to discuss salient issues on supply chains, a really important topic today. And so Jörg is also a fellow of the Center for Organization Research and Design at Arizona State University. As I said, he's one of the preeminent scholars on supply chains, on sustainability and supply chains. Sanjay Sharma, I might have known the longest. He is currently the Dean and Professor of Sustainable Business at the Grossman School of Business at the University of Vermont. Prior to this, he was the Dean of the John Molson School of Business in Montreal, my country and a wonderful city. Sanjay has been involved in sustainable research almost since its inception, having written 9 books in the area. As a dean, he has really advanced business school in sustainability, making Vermont a leader in the world with the Sustainable Innovation MBA program. It's currently ranked number 1 by the Princeton Review, and it's in top 5 by Corporate Knights. His area of expertise is understanding how organizations build capacity for embedding sustainability by building managerial motivations and unique capabilities. In recent years, he's focused much more on sustainability of family-owned firms. And I do want to thank Sanjay for having flown overnight. And so he's had a night without sleep, but still looks as fresh as ever. And Sukhbir Sandhu, who is in Adelaide, Australia, and it is 11:37. Is that right? Sukhbir there, PM. So good on her for also staying up late. She's an associate professor and co-director of the Centre for Workplace Excellence at the University of South Australia. One of Sukhbir's articles has been listed in the Financial Times as, I love this, all-time top 100 social science research that can meaningfully have social impact, and improve society. She's won more awards than we want to talk about here because it would take all morning, my morning, and she's shown her commitment through various volunteer positions. Her area of research bridges the individual and the organizational level of analysis, showing how people can champion positive change in organizations. I want to get to the questions. So with that, every day, academic research is published to inform the world's biggest problems. And so we aim to inform those business decisions that shape workplace policies and behavior. I would love to hear from each of you, and we'll go in the same order to start. Oh, no, I'm actually going to change that up. I want to hear from each of you those big issues today that really anchor sustainability. This is, by the way, the second question I'm moving to first. What are the big issues today that really anchor sustainability? So why don't we start with the people that I went in order with? Christian, what are those big issues today?
Yeah, well, thanks so much, Timo, for the great introduction, and Steve and team for bringing us together. Hi, everyone. It's great to be here. From our perspective, I mean, a lot of our research is with organizations that try to become more sustainable. And so from that perspective, when I see their efforts, there's kind of three key themes that I think we've seen them kind of trying to, overcome. One is the question of impact measurement. There's a lot of narratives. There's a lot of ideas of, yay, great, let's, invest this and this into community efforts. And there's a lot of kind of focus on inputs and the processes, but not so much on the actual outcomes. And so when you look at the annual reports of companies, you'll see a lot of times that they discuss a lot about how much money they spend on something versus, hey, this is actually the long-term outcomes that came of. So I think the first thing is really the kind of impact measurement piece. The second one is really around, how do we bring together the kind of bigger term narratives, CEO narratives that are usually long-term and vision focused, and then the day-to-day reality of employees going into the office on Monday morning and feeling that and seeing that in their work and kind of their incentives. And then third, really the idea of how do we bring the unexpected into our planning. In our research, so we do a lot of research, especially with CEOs, and the most successful of them seem to have in common that they're extremely good at cultivating serendipity, this unexpected good luck, because they see something in unexpected moments where they're like, oh my God, we could adjust our strategy based on this. And by making it an active part of their leadership, it actually doesn't become a threat then the unexpected, but it becomes part of the plan. And I think that's a really important thing when we look at the world, how complex societal and environmental challenges are. We can't just pretend that we know everything. We have to somehow have the humility to say, here's a vision, here's a plan, here's a strategy, but we'll adjust that as information comes in. I think that kind of, to me, are the three key challenges, but also great opportunities.
And I love that because I do think that there's much more turbulence than we've ever seen before. So it's important to be adaptive to the changes. So for you, Jörg, what are the big issues that you're seeing today?
Well, my colleagues and I help governments and companies to better understand how things are made, and not necessarily technologically, despite I actually started as an engineer. But when I discovered in work what it is, it's really about the terms of sharing of work. And I guess that's where we're all getting confused. And how these supply chains relate to various sustainability issues that we're seeing and we're increasingly discussing. The problems in China, in Bangladesh, the Ivory Coast, we could continue with the list. They're actually pretty close to us in the global north. And there they produce for us here to consume under conditions that harm the environment, the workers here to actually create a benefit for us. And it is this divide that somehow we need to negotiate. Companies require resources and structures that enable them not only to know what's going on in their supply chains, to avoid or to limit liability, reducing risk, which is still a very predominant reaction, but also how to change the situation. So it's not enough just to know. We need to become able to change the situations. And if it's upstream in the chain beyond the direct suppliers, this is where really the problems are, and we need to develop that capability. Governments need to know what behavior to support and what to limit. And that's not necessarily laws and fines, but it's much more motivation and having that conversation that ranges across those who know from procurement over distribution, production, lawmakers, all these actors to bring them together. That really is, for me, the challenge to go forward.
What about you, Sanjay?
Yeah, so I just want to point out in your introduction, Tima, you said that I've been looking at these issues from inception, and you've been looking at them for about 30 years. But I think the gap between inception and 30 years is not much. So we are contemporaries. We've been looking at these for a long time. I totally agree with what Christian said, that one of the big challenges that companies are facing is this confusion about metrics. So you've got the UN SDGs, and they're trying to figure out, how they can make an impact on UN SDGs and which ones are relevant, and how can they translate the UN SDGs into metrics for organizational performance. The second issue, of course, is, there are different standards in different countries and different contexts, and they're trying to sort that out. They don't want to make huge investments in one area and then have to backtrack and change because the metrics are changing. So there are some efforts going on, and in terms of research and trying to figure out how do you standardize these metrics for the companies so that they can sort of come together coherently in an industry to have real impact. The second question, which is a very practical question, which companies ask me all the time, is not that they don't believe that there are significant sustainability challenges in the world. It's not that they don't believe that climate change isn't happening. It's just that how do we address this? So we have our corporate mission, we have our business model. Within this business model, how can we balance return to investors and also perform on social and environmental metrics? So that's been my focus of research, and that is the biggest issue for companies right now. It's not denying sustainability, it is the how part of sustainability.
We no longer have to convince them. What we have to do is tell them how.
I think, Tima, it's that might be a broad statement because I think it's an incremental process. I would say that starting from a very low base, there are increasing number of companies that are convinced that they need to do something. They need to understand how to do it. And this is growing to a critical mass, but there is still a huge group of companies out there that are not doing anything. So I think the challenge for us is to bring these companies through research to an understanding that, yes, it's possible to have an impact.
Wonderful. Sukhbir, let's hear from you. What are the big issues today?
In fact, my research team is focusing on very similar issues as Sanjay highlighted. So in the years that I've been studying sustainability, various terms have become popular. They've waxed and waned in their importance. So it used to be CSR, corporate social responsibility, corporate social and environmental responsibility, triple bottom line. And it seems ESG, environmental, social, and governance, is the latest milestone in this journey. And a lot of media attention is saying, now these are the three letters that can save the planet, the messiah, so to speak. And with $35.3 trillion of ESG investment, it almost seems that it's the next big thing. But very much like Sanjay, our research team is very concerned that before ESG can be the messiah, there are some fundamental problems that we need to address in measurement. So currently you could report ESG, as Sanjay said, on the UN SDGs, on the global reporting initiatives, or pretty much every consultant has their own ESG scorecards. And that means we can hardly compare like with like. So ESG's measurement is problematic. The disclosures are problematic. So we report on scope 1, the direct emissions, the scope 2, electricity, but 90% of emissions come from scope 3 and less than 50% firms report on that. So it's like what Levenstein once said, ESG is almost currently, he said this about statistics, but it's like a bikini. What it hides is important. What it reveals is important. What it hides is vital. So there's a lot of misinformation in ESG. And of course, ESG fails to address the fundamental issue that it examines the risk that climate change poses to business, not the core thing about how businesses pose a risk to the planet. So measurement, disclosure, impact. So our research is focusing on, before ESG can be the messiah, we need to address these issues about measurement, disclosure, and impact.
The theme that I definitely hear among three of you right now is this notion of measurements, right? So we need to be able to measure our impacts, give some guidance on what we need to do, let's say through ESG, and those measures are imperfect. Have I, if I've captured that correctly, I think that, sorry, and what I also heard Sukhbir also saying is that scope 3 measurements are particularly important and not being measured. Is there any guidance that Christian, Sanjay, and Sukhbir that you can give us specifically to assist, based on the work that you've done, that can assist organizations in that impact or capability or activity type measurement that will advance their progress?
At least in our research, we're finding that currently all that ESG is doing is creating full employment for consultants and accountants. So it does immediately need, there's an urgent need for standardization. Now, can businesses standardize? Probably not. Maybe industries can, and maybe the government levers need to be pressed. But again, that's problematic because the US has started the SEC is saying, let's measure these. Europe is measuring on different standards again. So we do need some form of a standardization, but it's probably beyond business to what George, you highlighted about regulatory levers need to be pressed for standardization of measurement and reporting. Will it happen fast enough, furious enough, using your words, Tima? We don't know, but that's what our research is highlighting is needed urgently.
Yeah.
Can I just jump in here about ESG? And I think Sukhbir alluded to that. ESG has, in some ways, risks becoming symbolic. So, it's what has happened is, when BlackRock a couple of years ago, Larry Fink said that BlackRock would not invest in companies that did not meet certain ESG standards. Everyone wanted to jump on the ESG bandwagon because BlackRock is one of the larger institutional investors in the world. In fact, it is the largest. And companies want BlackRock to invest in them because unless you have a big institutional investor investing in a company, they find it difficult to get all their shares listed. So businesses have started, as Sukhbir said, NASDAQ has started a consulting company which helps companies meet the minimum ESG metrics so that they can be listed by BlackRock. And a lot of this is maybe greenwash is a strong word, but a lot of it is symbolism, and there is no real impact that the companies are having. So again, going back, it's about companies really trying to figure out, based on their operations, where can they have meaningful impact. So let's take a carbonated soft drink company. What is their main impact? It's water. They are extracting clean water, and what are they giving back? Is it a net net positive return on water, or is it depletion of water resources? It's packaging. It takes something like a carbonated soft drink. It's 99% water and it's packaging and it's nothing else. So from that perspective, this is where they can have a real impact. Question is, should they be looking at ESG or UN SDGs, all symbolic signals, or should they be looking at meaningful impact for their operations? And one of the other things is that they cannot completely switch gears. They can invest for the future. Maybe we'll come to it in the future in other businesses, but right now they have to really create a positive impact in their current business. So that's where, in terms of research, we are helping them in looking at their business and transforming their business to have a positive impact.
Christian, I'm going to shift the question just slightly for you. And what I'm hearing Sanjay say, that has to be very specific to the organization. And what you do is really talking about this notion of narrative. And so I think that narrative, I'd love to hear more about what you're doing in terms of narrative, but also then how narrative allows one, and possibly even bridge into your ideas about serendipity, that narrative allows you to be a bit more flexible. I don't know if you wanted to broach some of that.
Yeah, I love that question, because it's so much about, when you think about it from the perspective of a leader, you're sitting there and you have all these different standards. I mean, to Sukhbir's point, there's the IRIS standards. There's the kind of all these different communities that have their own kind of, hey, this is the gold standard here in this field and so on. And something that we've found very useful is to look at impact investors, because impact investors, in a way, even the acumen funds of the world, they've been doing this for decades, right? They've for decades tried to understand, how do you understand social environmental impact and how do you go about it? And so, when you look at what they are doing, they're a lot of times saying, okay, let's look at all these different, key standards, and then let's pick and choose those things that work best in our context. And then let's justify why we're using this. And then let's complement that with storytelling, to your point, because in a way, a lot of times, what really brings points home, especially for employees, is the idea that there is some kind of impact that you can see, right? In terms of a story that you can tell that, hey, we helped Hilda in Cape Flats in Cape Town to have this life now because of what we've been doing here. And so it's kind of, I think, in the impact measurement debate, I'm a big fan of saying, yes, we need all these, quantifications in some way or the other. But to your point, a lot of times outcomes are very lively. They are very, partly they're not that easy to grasp. And so you also want to have that storytelling, visual storytelling and other means. And so I'm a big fan of that. I'm also to get people excited. And to your question, I think, and it builds on Sanjay's earlier point. So one theme that came out of our research is that the most successful companies that we've studied are extremely good at saying, let's kind of understand a little bit what the big problem is that we're trying to solve. And usually they look at the SDGs or similar kind of, frameworks to understand, okay, we want to tackle malnutrition, or we want to tackle something that's bigger than ourselves as an organization. And then at the same time, how does that relate to our capabilities so that we can do something with it? And so MasterCard, for example, MasterCard would say, we used to be a payments provider. We're really good at it. But you know what? Our employees and people around us would probably be much more excited if we were to say 500 million people who were previously unbanked should be in the financial system. So that's the kind of whole financial inclusion idea, right? That let's bring them into the system. So now you have that North Star that is kind of anchored in the SDGs, where you're saying, we want to bring 500 million people into the financial system that previously were not part of it, that couldn't be entrepreneurial because they didn't have access to resource and so on. And so the point then is, okay, they have this, they develop a strategy around it. But then, Ajay Banga, who back then was the CEO, he would be smart enough to say, you know what, here's the strategy. But I'm telling you already now that as we learn more from local communities, as I bump into Hilda in the Cape Flats in Cape Town, I will adjust that strategy. And that's not a sign of weakness. That's actually a sign of strength, that we're able to respond to learning what's along the way. And to me, that, Timo, is at the core of this, to say old school leadership is about saying, I know everything, I control everything. And this is kind of this illusion of control, right? Versus this type of leadership is about saying, I give you a sense of direction, I give you clarity, but I can't give you full certainty. And that's okay, because actually that's why we create a culture that allows for this kind of serendipitous encounters to happen. And, we could probably fill a couple of sessions just about the mechanisms for this, but, I'd be delighted to talk more about this. But I think that the core of this is really to say, how do we then create a culture that allows these unexpected moments to become part of strategy by investing into unexpectedly emerging ideas and so on?
I just want to synthesize some of what we've just heard and then move on to Jörg, because he's doing some really cool stuff. But we started with this notion of ESG measurements. What are we doing? And we recognize that those ESG measurements are flawed. We have this movement of financial capital that's happening within this sustainability space, whatever it looks like, including BlackRock, a lot of potential greenwashing in it. But then also the landscape is just changing so quickly as well. And so I think that Christian really does a nice job then of also saying that we are not just thinking about measuring what we do, but we're also thinking about impact, and impact is hard to measure. And then it becomes a matter of stories and texts and visuals that really engage people's imagination. And that's where I think sustainability draws a whole breadth from being really solid numbers to also the scope of what can we be. Jörg, I am so interested in the whole supply chain question. And in fact, that could also involve this entire session. Now, there's a lot of conversation about just supply chains being locked up right now post-pandemic. But your work is really in sustainability of supply chains. And you had also talked about upstream invisibility of what's happening in Bangladesh and China, et cetera. I would love to hear more about some of your work, which I think has been really provocative in the insights that you've developed on sustainability and supply chains. Maybe you could tell us about that.
Well, thanks, Tima. Well, just to catch up on the discussion that you had first on the measurement side, I mean, measurement is a key issue in the supply chain because people are saying what we want, and how do you communicate what you want into the chain? And if you're just considering the complexities we have in these chains, how do you get actually your idea being bought in by those who supply to you? And I guess there's one of the big misunderstandings in this world that people think that the client is king and the suppliers would very happily just do whatever you want. And if you just think about big companies, there's many that are in the upstream. So they are not sitting there and saying, hey, I was just waiting for you to ask me for a new standard. And that created a huge complexity. So big that there's been big work by the ITC, which is the UN and the WTO together to compare standards and just trying to, in a way, help us to better understand all that. And then there's another question to that. Are these measures that we're asking actually meaningful? Do they relate to what the suppliers are actually facing as an issue? And there's this nice way of saying the path to hell is paved in good intentions. And I actually think a lot of the companies, they try to do good things with the code of conduct that they have decided. And they never really had the opportunity to check them. So when they're adopted in the countries with this lack of understanding, they actually didn't help. And I guess that's what we're seeing in many parts of the world, that we made less progress than we wanted. And I remember many years ago, the CPO of AkzoNobel, a company that was for a long time rated as very sustainable, he said to me, the major difference that I made, and that probably helped us a bit in becoming the company we are, is that our buyers, we are traveling to the places of the world where suppliers are that we don't understand, because that's why we have to go there ourselves. We need to know that context, to know the companies, to build up relationships that we can interpret what is going on there. There's no need for us to do any auditing in areas that we know, because we can interpret it that way. And what most of the companies are doing is just the opposite. Maybe it's convenience, maybe it's other reasons, but it is that active engagement in trying to understand with one another. And I will never forget, I was at WTO meeting about sustainability in supply chains. It was hosted by the Chinese government, by the World Bank, by the usual suspects. And all of a sudden, there's this gentleman standing up, introducing himself as the president of the Ghanaian Exporters Association. And he said one thing: you are always talking about us. You should be talking with us. I have nothing to add to that. And I think this is the most important thing for us to understand, that if we want to bring progress in these chains, we need to take each other serious, because we're trying to solve very serious problems.
I love that too. And this notion that you can't do this at a distance, you have to be really there, approximately watching. I wanted to shift the conversation a little bit to, we've looked at the measurement side of things. We looked at supply chains as well. So how do we get the data or information? How do we tell the data? How do we tell the stories? To now shifting it to how do we change organizations? So we've got employees that really care about sustainability. We have CEOs that even care about sustainability, but we have these organizations that don't move. And so what are some of those levers that individuals can use within organizations, whether at the CEO level or at the individual level? Sukhbir, maybe we'll start with you because I know some of your work's in this area, but then I'd love to shift the levels as well.
And I'm trying to think which of our two research projects, we've got two research projects which answer it. I'll try the first one, and if the other one comes along for later in the questions, I'll do that. So in one of our latest research projects, Tima, we're trying to tackle this problem that you've just mentioned. So a lot of organizations want to do well in sustainability, and yet they fail. So we've been trying to understand how can we get them to succeed. And what we're finding in our research is that organizations often start by focusing on policies, and policies then become decoupled from practices. And of course, the initiatives fail in the long run. So we've developed a framework which we call as the 3 Spaces Framework for Sustainable Change. And at its core, what it's trying to say is think of an organization as operating in 3 spaces, metaphorical spaces: the physical space, which is about policies; the mental space, which is about shared understanding; and the third circle there is the social space, which is about your external stakeholders. So the policies, the shared understanding, and your external stakeholders. You could actually start change on sustainability in any one of the 3 places. Now, most organizations do it with formal policies, but till you couple it by creating shared understanding in your employees and get your stakeholders to hold your feet to the fire, it fails. Equally, you could start with shared understanding, but if you don't have formal policies and if your stakeholders aren't holding you accountable, it fails again. So the key thing in our current research project is this coupling between the 3 metaphorical spaces: policies, shared understanding, and getting your external stakeholders to hold you accountable. If you're able to couple all 3, sustainability efforts would succeed. If not, they'd fail.
I like the fact that you're looking at failure, right? We tend to often just look at success. Anybody else that wants to weigh in? We'll go with Christian first and Sanjay on how do you create change in organizations?
Yeah, I've always found that a fascinating question also because everyone, talks about change and innovation, but then when it affects someone, you're like, oh my God, not me, like everyone else, but not me, right? And so there's this kind of human desire that we like, obviously, to know what's happening. And so I think I've always found that fascinating in our research. Like, in a way, the organizations that do well are the ones who make it very clear to individuals what will happen. So to kind of take away this ambiguity of not knowing absolutely what will happen. So giving clarity, right? Again, not giving the certainty, but giving some sort of clarity, especially what it means if you don't change. I mean, that reframing away from, what's the worst thing that happens if we change to, no, what's the worst thing if we don't change? Then in 2 years, we will be irrelevant. In 3 years, customers won't buy from us. And so I feel like that framing, in a way, then develops a bit more of that urgency of saying, actually, you know what, changing might be the most effective way to not have to change too much in terms of the big changes that might happen if we don't change. So first, this kind of really anchoring it a little bit more in the reality of the employees. And then second, that's actually the one that I feel organizations a lot of times are, very disconnected with, but where it has the biggest impact, which is really making values tangible and really saying, okay, if we have a value like, a related value like curiosity or alertness or whatever the kind of value is that you want to, learning culture, whatever culture you want to celebrate, that then actually, how is that embedded in everything you're doing? So essentially, are there practices in the day-to-day? Are you asking people in the weekly meeting what surprised you last week, that in a way then primes people to say, oh yes, I am allowed to be curious. I am allowed to do this. And my favorite practice there actually is the project funeral. And so the project funeral is this idea. It's some large companies that we've worked with do that, where essentially the idea is that whenever a project doesn't work, usually we try to hide it, right? Because we don't want to be the loser who messed it up and whose idea didn't work. And in this practice, you do exactly the opposite. You're essentially saying, we're never celebrating failure, but we're celebrating the learning from what didn't work. We celebrate the experiment. And so in this one example, the project manager who was responsible for one project presented in front of other project managers from other divisions. That's the idea, right? That you do it across divisions so that people kind of connect across the silos. And so laid it to rest, right? Like at a funeral, kind of laid the idea to rest. They had this amazing window glass that wouldn't reflect the light, right? So the idea is amazing technology, but they didn't realize, hey, the market is not big enough. So project manager lays it to rest and says, we learned, next time we'll understand the market better. Now someone in the audience goes, hey, have you considered what this would mean for solar? If we would take that technology into a solar context, how much energy could that absorb? And that's how serendipity, so part of their solar division, emerged. The point here is that, when you allow people to connect the dots for each other, especially with those things that don't work, then you create that kind of culture that, then you can put the value on it, curiosity or learning. But if you don't do these kind of things, people always feel there's this disconnect between, yes, we are all saying curiosity, but as soon as I ask a question, I get shot down. That actually leads to a lot of cognitive dissonance. And I think kind of creating that resonance between this is what we're saying our values are and our purposes and everything else, and this is what's actually happening, allows to connect this kind of organizational and individual purpose a little bit more.
Yeah, and I love this notion of curiosity and not always just focus on success, but also focus not on learning and making it fun and interesting. Sanjay, how are you gonna?
It's interesting that we are all doing similar things, but we are using different approaches or different language for it. So what Christian said is exactly been my research for God knows decades. And the focus is about how do you bring about change? As we know, change doesn't happen from the top. The top can send signals, the top can set policies, but that really doesn't lead to change. It only legitimizes change, that it's okay, but people don't change. So in order to change, you do have to help people understand that how is this going to affect my job? How is this going to affect the output of what I do? Where do I get the information in order to do this? And all the things that Christian talked about in terms of creating cross-functional teams, creating experimentation, creating the freedom to make mistakes, the project funeral, as he talks about, creating discretion to managers so that they can, have resources available in order to experiment and do things is really important. And the transformation to sustainability is about innovation. Here we are trying to change a very short-term model into a long-term focus. And when you're trying to make that leap between a short-term focus to a long-term focus, it requires a lot of innovation. So you require managers to look at this as an opportunity. So how do you create that opportunity frame? That's something, I've been doing in terms of legitimizing change and in terms of driving change. But then there is the second part of that. And of course, going back to what Sukhbir said in terms of stakeholders, stakeholders are very critical in order to bring external knowledge into the organization and in order to make change. But that's one part. The second part is, again, something Christian used a different language for that. I use capabilities. How do you create the mechanisms and the routines and the processes in order to drive that change? And that's all the capabilities are embedded in people. So this is where the organization can help with its organizational structures and processes in order to embed this. Once the momentum starts, change happens. My favorite quote is from Ray Anderson, who everybody knows Ray Anderson, who started Interface and then started this journey. One of the things he used to say is that when I started climbing the sustainability mountain, each step that I took, I saw new vistas, and I knew that there were so many possibilities. There's so many things I could do to transform the organization, but you have to set them on the path. So I think this is basically, when I hear Sukhbir and I hear Christian, I think we are all doing the same thing with different lenses.
Yeah, absolutely true. I've been prompted to ask the very last question, but before I do that, I really want to hear about your research finding about sustainable supply chains and how they have experienced less of an impact post-COVID. Can you just tell us that surprising finding?
Yeah, sure. Well, during the peak of the pandemic, we wanted to know how people deal with it, and with shortages. I mean, you remember the toilet paper, but it was the small one. The big ones were those things that were not delivered. And the very interesting thing that we discovered is that those companies who had less problems or no problems almost were those who said, we have developed over the last 10 years of our intensive sustainability-based work with our suppliers, good relationships, caring relationships, just a very different way how we work together. And guess what? We didn't have problems because we told them about our problems. They told us about their problems. And with that, we jointly found solutions, and the whole thing became very resilient, things that we were using normally. While those who are saying, we use the typical ways of exchangeability, never put all your eggs into one basket, never have one just supplier, etc. It didn't work. And the thing that surprised me a couple of, it's 2 months ago, I was invited to speak on a panel of the conference board with a lot of supply chain senior leaders there, facing these supply shortages. And what did I hear? The people were talking about, we have to increase our supply base, never put one supplier out there, all the stuff that we heard over the last 40 years. And the thing that I wonder is, why is it that we made these experiences the very hard way during the pandemic? Why is it that most of the companies don't see that? And of course, those companies who made that experience, they will never go back. In fact, 2 of these companies, the leaders, the procurement leaders, they have started something called the Sustainable Procurement Pledge, because they said, we can change as buyers, we can change as procurement specialists, and we can bring that change. But it takes a lot of time and it takes a lot of mindset to go again. And that brings us just back again into the conversation we just had.
Yeah, that is super. I love where this is going, and I have been prodded to allow time for questions from the audience. And so, where I wanted to leave you with the very last question. So,
can I just say one thing, Tima, very quickly? And Jörg will agree with this. Once change starts, it happens very quickly. It's amazing how fast it happens. This is some research Jörg and I are doing. It can happen very quickly. So I think we should not give up hope.
Yeah. And so very quickly, a quick response is, why does it happen quickly once it starts? What is it about this?
It's about momentum. I don't think I can give you an answer quickly. But the thing is, people begin to see possibilities. People begin to see the link between change and positive outcomes. And they begin to get, I would say, more of an opportunity mindset and a future-oriented mindset. And we've seen that. And we've seen that in many contexts, but more recently in research that Jörg and I are doing. We were pretty amazed at how fast the change happened.
You know, what's amazing is that when people think about sustainability, they often think about, oh my God, the earth is burning out, which it is. Or we have pandemics, or we have inequality or poverty, and all of these big issues that sort of put weight on us. And those of us who are working in the field, the 4 of you for sure, are starting to speak about opportunities, about innovation, about positive impact, about momentum in this way of positivity that often people don't ascribe to sustainability. So I think it's a really good segue for very brief answers about what do you think the future is? And I'd just like to have a quick fire response from each of you. So if you're ready to respond, put your hand up and then I'll just call. What's the future look like? Christian.
Yeah. So, I mean, first of all, Tima, thank you so much for making this happen. I just recommend everyone who's watching this to check out all your talks, because I feel you probably have the most to say in this panel, or among the most to say about these questions. And so I think, I hope people check out your videos around this as well. So thank you for allowing us the stages in this regard. But so my response would be the future really to me is a lot about mindset, right? That in a way, this all, I think Sanjay said it earlier, this is all about people, right? We can talk about capabilities, we can talk about mechanisms, but at the end of the day, it's about people. And I will never forget, the first time I started working in the Cape Flats in Cape Town around 10 years ago, an impoverished area in South Africa, I came in and asked, what is the one thing I should never ask you that, all these do-gooders who come into your context always ask you? And, the now good friend of mine said, well, never ask me first what I need. Because if you ask me what I need, you put me into the role of the victim, the beneficiary, someone who needs your benevolence. Because if you come in and say, what's already here? How can we make the best of it? You can still think about resourcing and everything, but we start on the same level. And to me, there was a big shift in thinking in terms of saying, you know what? People want to create their own luck locally. They don't want someone to come in and say, I have all the solutions, here's the solutions. But they want someone to come in and say, oh, there's a former drug dealer. Fantastic. You'll be resourceful. You have creativity. You have social capital. If we can help you become a teacher, you can turn a whole community around. And so I think it's kind of this idea that if we can allow people to cultivate their own local serendipity, this smart luck that they want to create themselves, I think to me, this is the biggest kind of potential we have, because then it's not about a few people who make change happen, but literally every community member can be part of it. And it's very dignified. And so that's kind of my hope, that we get towards that kind of mindset.
Dignity, inclusiveness. I love it. Sukhbir.
So I guess for me, the one big thing is I've been teaching and researching sustainability for more than a decade now. And my students would ask me, can you give us examples of a sustainable business? And I'd struggle. I have a handful, Interface being one of them, Sanjay, but they often fall short of Mount Sustainability, using raised words. For me, what the future suggests is individual organizations cannot be perhaps sustainable. Maybe it's a cluster of organizations. And in a research project that we have applied for funding for, we're trying to understand how to get these clusters to work together. How can some organizations push others towards sustainability? Because individual organizations can't do it. It's a group of organizations that need to come together.
Collaboration is also the future for sure, and collaboration with competitors even. Sanjay.
Yeah, so I would say that collaboration and dialogue at different levels. So right from, industrial symbiosis, where organizations are willing to talk to each other. And, well, it doesn't matter if you're competitors. If you can use each other's waste and you can create a closed ecosystem, then that works. Absolutely. No organization is an island. Number two, you need the dialogue between people in different disciplines, not only in practice, but in research as well. Because, one of the challenges we have as researchers in organizations and management is that we tend to focus on a very, very narrow slice, which is how research is done. But the problem is that we are really not measuring meaningful impact on the environment. And I think in order to do that, we need to collaborate with natural scientists who understand meaningful impact. And that is happening with organizations, but not happening in research enough. And in the third area, of course, we talked about cross-functional teams, even within organizations, in order to affect change. But finally, going back to what Christian said, in order to meaningfully solve problems, many of the problems are at the base of the pyramid and in developing countries, and you cannot really have an impact unless you have a dialogue with the people who are really living those problems from day to day. So that dialogue is the future. And I did say that, we should be hopeful because there is a movement. But, going back to your words, Tima, the world is burning. And people say that we are reaching a tipping point. I think we have reached the tipping point. We see it every day. And there are days when I don't have hope.
Mm. It's so true. And then we have to figure out the ways to move that forward. And the conversation among unlikely partners is going to be part of that. Jörg, the more reflective one of the group. I'm sorry we always pull you in last, but I'd love to have you end this.
Well, I'm very positive about the future, despite all the obstacles that are out there. But I think we're seeing more and more cool new business models. And that's what I remember about Andy Grove saying, only the paranoid survive. And I hope that the companies are substituting their bad business models today with the new ones for tomorrow. And that we're getting rid of the things with new ideas. And I think something that really moves center stage is values. We have more and more values conversations in societies, in companies everywhere. So we're going back to what we really want. We're thinking much less about products, much more about the benefit we take out of them, how we can use them, how we apply them, whether we need to own them or not. So there's a lot of things that are actually put at question and that create new business models. And that's really cool. And we will always be sharing work, but we'll hopefully be sharing work not based on the price, but by the values. And that's what I had said at the COP26 when I talked. I said, I think we move away from supply chains to values chains, deliberately values chains of similar values that together deliver that value that we're all aspiring for. And I think that we're moving to something that is valuable. So that's my hope.
The old business model might just die as the dinosaurs had once done. I am going to pass this back to Andrew. I have to say it's completely delightful, as I expected it would be, to talk to the four of you and your various contributions to research and practice. Andrew.
Thank you very much. Appreciate all of your time. Panelists, Tima as the moderator, thank you. Great job. Thank you to all the attendees as well. This concludes today's panel, AOM Scholars on Leading the Sustainable Way Forward. If you do have questions that come up or you want to watch the recording again, please feel free to reach out and email press@aom.org. We're happy to coordinate responses from any of the panelists as a follow-up to this session. Thank you again for attending. We look forward to seeing you again at another AOM function.